Hey guys, this is Vincent. Today I want to talk about the Ukraine war, and specifically why I think that it might be ending in the next month or two. Now, you'll notice when it first started, Russia pretty quickly took over Crimea, and other than that, it's been relatively slow moving. I mean, this is the major front here. If I zoom in a little bit closer, you can see there's not actually that heavy occupation by Russian forces, despite the fact that war has been raging on for a very long time. And in fact, Ukraine is actually pushing into Russia through the Kursk region. And that's all been happening very recently. So despite the fact that this war has been raging on for a very long time, you're not actually seeing this, Russian obliteration of Ukraine. That's not happening at all. And that's one reason why people thought Russians would just back down after a while and stop attacking. Well, Russians never actually ended up doing that. People thought they would, but they never ended up actually following through on the whole, we're going to stop attacking people thing. Like, we're going to stop attacking Ukraine thing, because we've already gotten as much as we can feasibly. I mean, they're importing North Koreans to fight in the war, so clearly they don't have the necessary infrastructure to do this well, and yet they're still going through with it. Which left a lot of people thinking that they would just end up with a situation where Russia continues fighting Ukraine until Ukraine has no people left in it, and then they just steamroll them, which is a horrible scenario to imagine. But I would like to make the counter-argument that I think it's going to end pretty soon. I don't think you're going to have this attrition warfare for much longer. And I try to be as nonpartisan as I can on this channel. I'm generally I don't support one candidate or the other necessarily on this channel. Although I would like to make the case that I think Trump will probably end the war in Ukraine pretty quickly, because of not necessarily policy on a policy perspective, but just the fact that Trump and this guy, I don't know if you guys know who this is, but this is Mohammed bin Salman. He's the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and Trump is actually pretty good friends with this guy. He's met with him like 15 times, and every time he's asked him to drop prices of oil in OPEC, he always does that. And by the way, in case you're wondering, the way you drop prices of oil in OPEC is you just bump up your production rate of oil. So if I zoom out on this little handy-dandy map that I found, you can just kind of come in here and see Saudi Arabia holds a lot of very prosperous land in the Arabian Peninsula for things like oil and natural gas production. And if Saudi Arabia chooses to do so, they can ramp up production significantly and decide to, just make oil prices go down almost unilaterally. Now, you might be wondering, well, what does Saudi Arabia have anything to do with Russia? In my opinion, Saudi Arabia is the reason why Russia's war is still going on. Should Saudi Arabia choose to increase production and drop oil prices, Russia would have no ability to attack Ukraine anymore. If you look at Russia's GDP, 16.7% of the country's GDP between April and June in 2024. So just the average GDP there, 16% of it is from the oil and gas industry. And in case you don't know how the oil and gas industry works, if prices go down, this is how it works in anything. If prices go down for the market price of oil, well, you're not going to be able to sell your oil to most other countries, normally speaking. Also, Russia has a ton of sanctions on it. So if it sells, Russia pretty much only sells oil to places like China. China charges Russia a bit more than market price for its oil, because Russia knows it can get a better deal. Or no, I'm sorry. China gets a better deal from Russia, so it gets a bit less than market price, because Russia is only really able to sell oil to China and a few other countries, because Russia has so many sanctions on it. So essentially, when you have a lower oil price, the oil exporter has to deal with that lower oil market price. So for a nation like Russia, which already has to deal with an artificially low market price, if the market price goes down, say 15-20%, then Russia's GDP, the 16% of its GDP, is knocked down by 15 to 20%, which is a significant amount. Consider that Trump's national defense budget is only 8% of nominal GDP. In other words, if they can cut out 4% of the GDP, because this is 16% of the gross domestic product is oil and gas. Say you get a quarter of that out via highly increased production of oil. which would cause prices to go down and cause their GDP to go down. 4% of GDP, right? That's half of their current military budget. They would need to invest an entire, like 1.5 times that they're already doing in their military budget. And, if you'll notice, their current inflation rate, 8.9%. You know what doing 1.5 times your current defense budget will do to your inflation rate? It'll send it soaring into the mid-15s and 16s. And Russia cannot afford that kind of economic downturns. They have absolutely massive interest rates in order to avoid the problems of having high inflation. And even despite their insanely high interest rates, which are like, in some cases, 20 to 30% interest rates, it's absolutely bonkers, they still have 9% inflation, which shows that if they had a regular interest rate, their inflation would be absolutely insane. And if Saudi Arabia chose to fix the oil prices to something that would be detrimental to Russia, then Russia's inflation probably will hit those kinds of numbers with the incredibly awful interest rates still intact. Now, in case that all sounded kind of crazy, basically what I'm getting at is Russia cannot sustain a war against Ukraine and Saudi Arabia. If Russia is fighting Saudi Arabia in this war, Russia will lose 100% of the time. And the U.S.'s job for this entire time in the war has been trying to get Saudi Arabia on the side of the U.S. against Russia. Biden was trying to do this the entire time while he was president during the Ukraine war. He was. It's just that Biden doesn't have as good relations with this guy as opposed to Trump. Basically, the reason, honestly, why he has much better relations is because in Saudi Arabia, there are significant human rights abuses. That's just a fact. They harbor gangs and awful Islamist coalitions that try to kill people all the time. And Biden was rightfully so very wary of that. Now, I'm not going to go and say that, the fact that Trump is, I'm not going to support either person over the other one. All I'm arguing is that the fact that Trump mostly ignores the human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia is going to mean that human rights abuses in Ukraine are going to get fixed significantly. Because, at least in my view, if you can take the Saudi Arabians and get them on the side of the US and the EU against Russia, that makes Russia need to spend 12% nominal GDP on the war, which means that its inflation rate will go up into the 20s a lot of the time. What that means is that any war efforts will become so much more expensive for Russia that China will either have to get involved or let Russia go down. And China will 100% tell Russia that. They're not going to tell them in public, but Russia will understand from China that if they don't pull back, China will either have to help them or let them die. Those are kind of the only two options there. And the most feasible option for Russia in the scenario where Saudi Arabia joins the coalition against Russia is that Russia comes to peace with Ukraine. What I would think probably ends up happening is, if you look here, the idea that Crimea will become Ukrainian once more is a pipe dream. Nothing more than that. There's almost no chance of Russia releasing control of Crimea. However, I think that these territories over here, especially in the far east of Ukraine, are a lot more feasible. So areas like, say, for example, Ukraine's been pushing into all of these territories, specifically this one and this one. Like, if you look in here, this territory of Kursk Oblast, it's a decently large territory. Ukraine's already taken over a couple of, several towns in this area. So what I'd like to argue is if Russia took, say, half of this and Crimea, and the rest of everything was given back to Ukraine, everything else was given back to Russia, so Russia gets Kursk Oblast again, and they agreed to a peace treaty, something like that, and then a couple of other terms attached, like maybe Ukraine can never join NATO, something like that. Like things of that nature would be a significant help as far as peace goes. Like, Ukraine would be a so much safer nation after that, because Russia would be totally embarrassed on the world stage and not really able to contend with everything else. What's even better about that is, for the American market, if you go over here, America could then buy a whole bunch of Saudi oil, while the prices are low, and then coordinate with Saudi Arabia. Like, this is just my opinion. This is more of a looking ahead to the future of like what's possible. I don't know how probable this is, but it's possible that the U.S. could buy a massive stockpile of Saudi oil in exchange for their help in lowering the prices of oil in order to cripple Russia. And then they could tell Saudi Arabia, okay, you guys can go ahead and raise prices and stop producing so much. Which, by the way, guys, Saudi Arabia has an absolute massive stockpile of oil and gas. So I believe they have the most in the world. It's either the U.S. or Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia has pretty much no environmental restrictions, so they effectively have the most. We might have the second most, but we have too many environmental restrictions to really make use of them in the way that Saudi Arabia does. But yeah, Saudi Arabia can pretty much totally control OPEC. Like, OPEC consists of Saudi Arabia and a bunch of much smaller states that don't have nearly as large oil reserves. It's like Saudi Arabia and Libya have some of the most, but Libya is literally in a civil war, so it's not exactly a fair match here between the two of them. Anyway, guys, yeah. Oh, yeah, I was going to finish my thought there. That the U.S. could buy a whole bunch of super cheap Saudi oil and then sell it once the Saudi Arabia raises the oil prices again, making a ton of money. Like, for example, let's go see price of 1 barrel of oil. Let's just see what that is. $84.78 per barrel. Now, let's say Saudi Arabia managed to drop this number down to $60. So if you bought, say, I don't know, 50,000 barrels at $60, just hypothetically. 50,000 times 60. Okay, it's not going to give it to me. That's like $3 million. Now, obviously, we buy way more than that. But hypothetically, $3 million. And then if Saudi Arabia raised the price to $90 a barrel, you'd be making $30 on the barrel. For 50,000 barrels, that's an absolutely insane amount of money. And Saudi Arabia can make that price fluctuate in just a year, like less than a year, like a couple of months. It's honestly astonishing how fast they're able to do these things. But yeah, guys, that's all I have for y'all today. I'm going to go into the whole Trump executive order stuff soon, but I figured this was probably the most important thing Trump's been doing lately, because I mean, just look at things like the global geopolitics are absolutely nuts right now. The fact that, Ukraine, they're being actively attacked by a nation, 10 times their size, and yet they're going in and conquesting villages is absolutely crazy to me. With like rockets and air artillery, it's absolutely nuts. In this little Kursk Oblast region, you can see here. Sudzha, it's called. Anyway, that's it for me. I appreciate y'all watching this video, and leave a like, subscribe, whatever y'all feel like doing. And see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.